An unwanted thought is like an unwanted guest. Pay no attention to the guest. Don't feed the guest. Don't talk to the guest. And the guest will leave eventually.
In this one-part documentary, we will discover what the cause of the secret illness really is. Obsessive Compulsive Disorder affects around 2 to 3% of the global population. As you can see on the map, the continents which are most affected by OCD are coloured red, and the countries which are least affected are yellow. So continents such as South America and Africa have a high population of people who suffer from the disorder, and Europe is orange, so this means it has a slightly less percentage. The disorder is a devastating and stressful disorder, which one may suffer from for a lifetime. But what causes OCD in the first place? We will investigate the biological, psychological and environmental factors that all play a role in causing the illness, and also we will speak to many professionals in an exclusive interview.
In a person who does not suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder, dopamine and serotonin are produced almost equally. However, in a sufferer of OCD, the basal ganglia overproduces dopamine, which therefore results in a low production of serotonin. This suggests that there are problems in communication between the orbital cortex and the basal ganglia. To send chemical messages from one neuron to another, serotonin must bind to the receptor sites, but in OCD sufferers, they seem to have blocked or damaged receptor sites, which can stop them from functioning properly, therefore producing anxiety.
Another theory which research has focused greatly around is brain activity. By using tools such as position emission tomography scans, it has shown that those who have OCD have activity that differs from those who don't have OCD. As you can see in this PET scan of a brain showing active areas in OCD, the top row shows positive correlation, which means as the activity increases, the symptoms get stronger, and the bottom row shows a negative correlation, which means that as the activity decreases, the symptoms decrease. On top of this, there are 3 main changes in the brain of an OCD sufferer compared to a non-sufferer. The first is the caudate nucleus, which is important in managing habitual and repetitive behaviours, and specific brain cells in the basal ganglia. These 2 parts of the brain act as a filter for thoughts coming in from other areas of the brain. The second major change is the prefrontal orbital cortex, which affects social behaviour. More activity means you are preoccupied with cleanliness, neatness, and being meticulous and concerned. OCD sufferers are very likely to suffer from one or more of these symptoms. Finally, the last change is the cingulate gyrus in the centre of the brain. This is the part of the brain that is highly interconnected to the prefrontal orbital cortex and the basal ganglia by a large number of brain cell pathways. It tells you to perform compulsions to relieve anxiety. So ultimately, this theory states that brain functioning in those with obsessive compulsive disorder may be impaired in many ways.
Obsessions and compulsions are 2 completely separate things, but I can guarantee the majority of you don't know the difference. Obsessions are characterized by intrusive and uncontrollable thoughts and images that happen continuously, whereas compulsions are behaviours or rituals that you feel driven to act out again and again. People rely on compulsions as an escape from the obsessive thoughts, but the relief is only temporary. Examples of obsessions could be fear of dirt or germs, and the compulsion could be excessive hand washing or cleaning. Another common symptom is neatness, order, worry and symmetry. This could cause excessive checking, ordering and even repeating words over and over again until it feels just right. It's fair to say that this can destroy lives and be incredibly difficult to deal with and to treat.
Another biological theory that I'm going to mention is one of the most recently discovered causes, and it relates to brain functioning, but also an infection called streptococcus. This is the bacterium that causes strep throat and impetigo. So in cases where a child has a sudden onset of OCD, it could be linked to an infection with streptococcus. This is because the body forms antibodies to the infection, which may mistakenly react to the basal ganglia. Now we're going to speak to Dr. Ivor Hodgson in an exclusive interview to find out what his opinions of the causes and symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder.
Firstly, why is obsessive compulsive disorder referred to as the secret illness?
Okay, the secret illness is not a term that I'm familiar with, but I can guess why it's referred to as a secret illness, and that really is that people tend to prefer to cope with the symptoms for many years really before seeking help. I think the reason for that is because OCD is quite a peculiar illness where the compulsions make the sufferer feel better about it. So in a way it's as if they're kind of treating themselves, although they're not getting to the root of the cause. Yeah. They're finding some kind of alleviation from the symptoms, and I think that's why they don't seek help sooner. It tends to be when it disrupts family life or work life that people think it's more important to seek help for it then. So that would be my best answer as to why it's called a secret illness.
Do you think that you're born with OCD, or do you develop it?
To a certain extent, I think genetics do play a role, particularly because there's a link to autistic spectrum disorders and to Tourette's syndrome, which both have more of a clearly identified genetic causation. But I think there's certainly more to it than just genes.
I understand that many professionals believe there are different causes for the disorder. Do you lean towards one particular reason?
I mean, in my clinical experience, I think that it develops as a means of people coping with anxiety, and I think that anxiety plays a much greater part in the causation than either serotonin or genes or family influences or psychological factors really. That would be my theory.
What role does the neurotransmitter serotonin play in the illness?
There's no clear established kind of link as to how serotonin affects obsessions or causes compulsions, but I suppose it would be empirical evidence in that using SSRIs, which are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they can in sort of 50% of the patients cause at least a partial remission in symptoms. So I think it's, because that works, then some people says, well, serotonin must have something to do with it. But there's no clear kind of serotonin does this and therefore it leads to this and causes that.
Is OCD caused by a genetic mutation?
It may well have something to do with it in some sufferers. I mean, I don't think it's the whole story, as I mentioned earlier, because there's the links with quite close links with other types of illnesses that are more clearly genetically defined. The problem is that we haven't mapped the whole of the genome yet, and when you get illnesses I mean, it's likely to have a recessive etiology for a start, so it's not going to be a single gene. It's going to have to be lots of different mechanisms that fall into place for the genetics to come out. And when you get diseases like that, I mean, other examples would be like hypertension, then it's difficult to say there's a single gene that causes it, and you need to know what all the genes do and how they interact to be able to clearly pinpoint it. So it's difficult to answer, but I think it's likely that, particularly in some people, that genes will play a part in it.
If a person's relatives suffer from OCD, they're more likely to have it?
I would say so, for several reasons really. I mean, one, we talked about genes. Obviously they'll have the same genes as their relatives, or they're more likely to have those genes. I mean, even if they have the recessive ones, they may have the more dominant gene from another parent, which cancels that out, if you like. But that is going to be a factor. But I think there's a big behavioural element as well, and if children see parents behaving in a particular way, they may learn that it's more acceptable to behave like that, and not see it as a disorder but as a means of coping.
Mm. Do you believe that depression could be a possible cause?
I mean, the common ground is the serotonin. I mean, that most people believe that serotonin is the thing that causes depression. It's the thing that goes wrong, if you like, which leads to depression. And because you're using antidepressants to treat, and it can be tempting to jump to the conclusion that it's the same underlying pathology. I don't think I mean, I think there is a good degree of comorbidity, so if you've got one of the illnesses, you're more likely to get the other. I think particularly because with OCD, if you get stresses in your life, then it can make it worse. It's notably bad around times of change. So if somebody's got a lot going on in their life, the symptoms can get worse. And if you've got depressive illness, that is a lot going on in your life, really, and I think it could make it worse. And the other, the converse could be true as well. That coping with obsessive compulsive disorder might lead to depression. But I think they're two separate illnesses, really.
Do you think that if you have a traumatic life experience, such as abuse and bullying, that could be a cause?
Certainly, I think psychosocial stress is an important aspect of every kind of mental illness, really. It's not confined just to OCD. But that may be the thing, that if you've got somebody who's genetically susceptible, may have a personality that's predisposed towards orderliness, may have psychological factors at play that might make them more predisposed to developing OCD, and then something like bullying happens, then I think that could be the final straw, if you like.
Yeah. Whilst researching, I found that psychological factors play a role in causing this disorder. To what extent do you agree or disagree?
I think that the most important part of the disorder is psychological, really. I think that would be more important than the genetic aspect. I think because the causation and the maintenance of a lot of the symptoms relate to psychological factors, and some of the manifestations, things like avoidance, and if you start to avoid things, psychologically they get worse, and I think that's what you see happens a lot in OCD. And if you look at the NICE guidance, have you heard of NICE guidance? Yeah. So it's the government's kind of guidelines on how best to treat different types of illnesses. The first line treatment is psychological, before you look at the tablets. I think that underpins how important psychological aspects are.
Do you think that most people relate objects and doing things with fear in some cases? So like if you don't carry out your obsessions and your compulsions, and something bad will happen?
Yeah, and that's one of and there's lots of different ways that the pathology expresses itself, but that's one of them. It's that something bad will happen to themselves or to other people, and they have to do it to prevent that from happening.
Finally, what does it mean if you have PRO?
PRO, again, is a term that I'm not overly familiar with, but I'm guessing it just means that you have obsessions. Obsessions are defined as intrusive recurring thoughts that are ego dystonic, and that's a scientific term to say that they're unpleasant, really. So it's not something that you'd like, it's not a thought that you'd like to have. And if somebody has PRO, I would guess that they're just experiencing that side of the disorder. And usually the compulsions come into play because people use compulsive behaviour as a means of alleviating the obsessive thoughts. The example that you used earlier was, they have to do something to stop something bad happening. And in that respect, the compulsion would be the act that they have to carry out. If they had PRO, they'd just have thoughts that something bad was going to happen, and they wouldn't necessarily do the other part of it.
Genes have been seen to play a large role in the causation of the disorder. Currently, there has not been a specific gene identified, but many professionals believe that this is because the whole of the human genome has not yet been fully mapped. On the other hand, an American researcher has shown that 30% of teenagers with OCD have a member of the immediate family with the disorder, and when a parent has OCD, there is a slightly increased chance that their offspring will. However, it is the general nature that is inherited, not the symptoms. For example, a parent may have obsessions about dirt, but the child may compulsively hoard things. We asked Leslie Shoemaker, the counselling psychologist, OCD Ireland, why obsessive compulsive disorder is commonly known as the secret illness. Let's see what she has to say.
Many people with OCD are ashamed and humiliated by what they consider the bizarre nature of their obsessive thoughts. Also, they usually recognise that checking or washing or hoarding will not, in reality, change anything, but they feel powerless to stop. Also, OCD sufferers are often aware that observers will find their OCD behaviours odd and perhaps unusual. As a result, OCD sufferers are less likely to share their problems with a family member or their doctor. Another reason for this shame and humiliation is because the content of the obsessions take the form of things the sufferer finds upsetting and distasteful. The content of the obsessions often reflect the opposite of the person's as well as society's values. Common examples of these types of distressing obsessions are a fear of harming others, a fear of being a paedophile, or a fear of contaminating the environment and making others sick. The interesting point is that everyone has strange and disturbing thoughts that pop into their head. The difference is that people with OCD believe that because they have these thoughts, it means there is something wrong with them, whereas people without OCD just simply dismiss the thoughts most likely without ever considering them again. Finally, people with OCD often worry that what they have is something very serious like schizophrenia. This often prevents them from seeking the appropriate treatment due to this fear. According to research from America, on average, people with OCD see 3 to 4 doctors and spend over 9 years seeking treatment before they receive a correct diagnosis. Studies have also found that it takes an average of 17 years from the time OCD begins for people to obtain appropriate treatment. Part of this delay is probably due to a lack of awareness about this disorder with GPs, and the other reason for this delay is probably due to how these feelings of shame and often guilt stop someone who has OCD from seeking help.
Okay, thank you very much for informing us about this, Leslie. We will now investigate the psychological causes of obsessive compulsive disorder. Two of the major theories are psychological, and the first is called the behavioural theory. It consists of the idea that people with OCD associate certain objects or situations with fear and learn to avoid the fear through rituals. This is most prominent when people are under periods of high stress and anxiety. The second is called the cognitive theory, which focuses on how people with OCD misinterpret their thoughts. The theory states that people with OCD exaggerate the importance of negative thoughts that others would easily shrug off. It is thought that this is due to false beliefs learnt earlier in life, such as exaggerated responsibility. This also relates to possible environmental causes. Research has shown that in many cases where OCD has developed in early teen years, that a parent's actions could be the cause. For example, if a child's mother has the disorder and has physical obsessions and compulsions about cleaning, then the child will think from a young age that their actions are acceptable, and they will copy them and see no harm in what they are doing. Another factor that researchers are focusing on is marital and employment status. If you are single, statistics prove that you are more likely to develop OCD than someone who is in a relationship. This is because you would have less help and support doing stressful things. Figures also show that if you attend college or university, the stress caused by revision and exams could lead to the development of the disorder. I'm here speaking to Trilda Breckman, the Development Manager from Triumphophobia UK. We're going to be asking her questions about OCD and what she believes to be the cause. So firstly, do you think OCD is inherited? Yes, in most cases, OCD begins at childhood. And I think, although genes do play a part in the disorder, I think that people who have parents who are neat, tidy and show slight symptoms of OCD are more predisposed to developing the disorder due to their parents' actions. I can remember a woman who was around 20, and she remembered the exact day she developed OCD. The family were going on holiday, and her parents were shouting, "Come on, pack your bags, we're going soon," and she was stood in her room. And she kissed all four walls because she thought that that would assure that the holiday would be good and that they would all stay safe.
So, why do you think OCD is called a secret illness?
Well, I think the main reason for this is because people are ashamed of their illness, because they don't think it is classed as normal or okay to have an obsessive thought or obsessive actions.
That's interesting. So, do you think it often takes people many years to find help from a professional?
Definitely. I think this is due to the embarrassment and the feeling of shame and loneliness, because they wouldn't have anyone to talk to.
So, do you think that OCD can be completely cured?
I think people can make a full recovery from OCD, but that is not the same as a cure. There is always a chance the illness could resurface. Stress is a trigger for the illness, and if someone is going through a very stressful episode in their life, then there could be a chance that it could come
So do you
back.
think there's enough awareness of the disorder in the public?
Well, yes, I think that over the last 10 years or so, more awareness has occurred due to celebrities such as David Beckham, Cameron Diaz and Leonardo DiCaprio admitting that they have been diagnosed with the illness. But I still think the public doesn't quite understand the real depth of the illness.
So, OCD is now an English lexicon for someone who is slightly neat and tidy but doesn't necessarily have the illness. How do you feel about this?
Well, I think this is definitely the case, and if you speak to older people, it's even more so. I can remember my friend who said that her auntie wouldn't let anyone visit or come into the house, and her husband even had to stand in the garage and take off all his clothes. But she didn't think that she had OCD, because years ago hardly anyone in the public were aware of the disorder. And it's
So, do you have any ideas of how to raise awareness of the disorder in the public?
Well, at the moment, OCD Action are running their annual awareness week, where they hold press conferences and appear on television and in magazines. So I think that ideas like these are the way forward.
So, thank you for allowing us to interview you. So, now we're going to go back and investigate the final cause. Last but not least, the cause that myself and many others believe to be the most prominent is stress. In the majority of cases where OCD occurs, the sufferer seems to be predisposed to developing the disorder until there is a trigger such as stress, which metaphorically sets the ball rolling. So when I say predisposed, I mean that they would have a genetic or biological cause, but then for example, a traumatic life event occurs such as bullying. This then causes additional stress, which makes the disorder noticeable, and it can really ruin lives. On average, in most cases where OCD occurs in childhood or adolescence, the causes are biological and environmental, but where OCD occurs in adulthood, the causes are mostly psychological and environmental.
Hi, I'm here at St Wilfrid's Catholic High School raising money and awareness for OCD Action. Here we have Joe. How much have you managed to raise?
I've raised £9.50.
Are you looking forward to it?
Yes.
Helen, how much have you managed to raise?
£25.
Right, so we're going to go up to the field now and do a half an hour run. We're down to the field now, preparing to do the race, just doing our stretches. We're preparing to do the race and we'll be doing it pretty soon.
The contestants are now beginning the run and they will be running for 30 minutes continuously. This is the track that they'll be running on. As you can see, the weather conditions aren't ideal, but the contestants are trying their hardest to run as many laps as possible. They are just ending this lap now, and the first to finish the first lap is Holly. She has done this in an amazing time of 2 minutes and 3 seconds. Now, Lydia and Chloe are ending their third lap and they look pretty tired, but hopefully they will be able to persevere and finish the whole run. Let's check up with the 3 of the girls and see how they're doing. I believe they are now running their 6th lap. The boys, Rory and Joe, are currently running their 10th lap and don't even look tired. Now, everyone is running their last lap, and as you can see, they seem to be enjoying themselves, even though it's absolutely freezing out here. Now we'll catch up with a few of the contestants and see what they have to say about the race.
Hi, we've just finished the race and we've run 30 minutes continuously and we made loads of money. How many laps have you run, Rory?
13.
Chloe?
12.
Helen?
8.
We all enjoyed ourselves?
Yeah.
So it's freezing now, so we're going to go back up inside.
By doing a sponsored run, we have managed to raise a massive £181.26. Thank you for everyone that has sponsored us to do the run. All this money will be going to a very worthy cause of OCD action. Thank you. Finally, a big issue that you all have heard in the interviews is awareness. Many of the professionals have brought up this problem, and by holding the fundraising event, we hope we've made Obsessive Compulsive Disorder more widely recognised amongst the public. I would now like to quickly thank all of the charities and professionals that have helped make this possible through interviews and sending extremely helpful leaflets. Thank you for watching. I hope you have found this documentary both interesting and informative.